Okay, now for the last item on the agenda, we have our panel of caregivers. And the moderator is my good friend, Candy Welch. I've known Candy also for almost 20 years. And her husband, Bob, had MSA. I don't know if you noticed in one of the brain donation brief slideshows, it mentioned Bob Thomas, and that's Candy's husband. And she leads our MSA caregiver support group, our local support group here at Brain Support Network. And she is a member of the Brain Support Network board. So she will introduce her panelists.
So, hi everybody. As Robin said, I'm Candy, and I'm really happy to be moderating this panel with our PSP-MSA.
You were using the
mic? Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
I forgot.
Maybe start again.
I know. Sorry about that. There we go. As Robin said, I'm Candy Welch, and I'm really happy to be here moderating the panel with our PSP, MSA, and CBD caregivers. We do thank everybody for being here today, either in person or virtually. For those of you who did show up today, I know from experience how hard it can be to get out of the house. As Robin said, I cared for my husband, Bob, who suffered from MSA until his death in 2008. So I do know that it is a struggle even getting dressed sometimes. And his MSA diagnosis was confirmed upon his brain donation. Okay, so we've got our panel here. We've got our PSP caregivers, Doug, who cares for his wife, Diane, Ellen, who cared for her mother, Nancy, Joan, who cared for her husband, Will, and Callie, who's actively caring for her brother, Kevin, and our CBD caregivers, Diane, who cares for her husband, Jeff, and David, who cares for his wife, Camilla. So we'll get going with our questions here. I'm going to start with you, Doug. We just want a little background. I'm going to ask everybody, what were Diane's first symptoms and where was she diagnosed?
Diane started having symptoms in 2018. She started falling. She was having balance issues, so she started using a cane. We couldn't figure out what it was. She thought it was arthritis. She wrecked the car. She drove over a center median on a 4-lane road. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. So we started realizing something was wrong. So in 2019, we visited a neurologist. We live in Santa Cruz, and by the way, she in 2018 was 74. So just to kind of give you a feel for age, we saw a neurologist in Santa Cruz, and he said, she has a neurological disease. I don't know what it is, but I do know that there's no cure and there's no treatment. So, and if you want to know more, I can refer you to to either Stanford or UCSF. And so we did the referral to UCSF. She was diagnosed actually via Zoom in 2020. Dr. Rojas Martinez said, "Yep, yeah, in my opinion, it's PSP," which they've since pretty much all of the doctors up there agreed with that. So she was kind of in a state of shock, like anybody would be, knowing that your life expectancy is now probably 4 to 6 years, and substantially less than that of cognitive abilities and physical abilities to do anything. So she put a list of things together that she wanted to accomplish, and she actually accomplished every one of them, which is really good. So then we had to go through issues of, trying to take care of her. We have 2 daughters, but they each lives over 1,000 miles from here. And then I had to go through treatment for cancer, which required spending some time at UCSF and through a treatment myself. So now all of a sudden we've got nobody in the house to take care of her. And so we had to, plan for how we're going to deal with those kind of issues, which I highly recommend you kind of come up with a plan B yourself. She has since progressed. She's gone through all the physical, occupational, speech therapy. That all ended in early 2024. And she has now progressed to the point where she is 100% bedbound. She pretty much eats. She can still eat. She has a lot of difficulty opening her eyes. She has a very difficult time communicating, so it's hard to know what she does or doesn't know. She hasn't called me by name in probably 6 or 8 months, so I'm not sure if she just can't get it out or whether she has lost that much memory. And so she's basically in bed 24/7 at this point.
So we'll move on, but yeah, thank you for all that background. And then, Ellen, briefly, if you could tell us, how did you know there was something wrong with your mom?
My mom lived across the country in North Carolina, and I was managing her business for her remotely. And she was at the time actively caregiving for my stepfather, who was 10 years older than she was. She was in her late 70s at this point. And I was getting a call once in a while, something's wrong with your mom. The caregivers from my stepdad, who'd met her years before, were like, she's different. We think she's had a stroke. So we had a neurologist assessment, and they said, no, we don't see anything. And then when he passed, the plan had always been for her to come move out to live with us. And it was really hard to help her remotely do that. She didn't do a good job packing her things. She confessed that she was overwhelmed. And when she arrived, I connected her to my doctor for all the medication she needed and the general establishment of a doctor for her. And that doctor, bless her heart, said, I don't know you very well, but you seem to be slurring your words. I think you should see a neurologist. And so we had a CT done, and they looked at it and they said, we think this is frontotemporal dementia maybe coming on. So we grappled with that for a year. And then we had an assessment done at UCSF, Dr. May, gerontology, psychiatry, something like that, battery of tests. And they said, we think this is PSP. And they were looking at her gait and talking about the tendency to fall and her eye movements and certain things. And it kind of went from there.
Okay.
So.
All right, thank you for that. And then Joan, what were Will's first symptoms? Some of them he had, can you hear me? Yes. Some of them he had for years, and they were each treated separately until we were leaving the Fremont 4th of July parade, and he couldn't walk. He got stuck. And of course, people were in a hurry and going around us, and I wasn't very nice. I would say, can you see he's having trouble walking? So we went to a neurologist. He thought it could be Parkinson's. He didn't want to rule it out. He wasn't sure. We went home. I looked at the list and went, oh, yes, 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 no, no, yes. And then we put it all together, and it was treated as Parkinson's. And then he went to a movement disorder specialist at Kaiser San Leandro, Dr. Lee, who said, no, I think it's MSA because the carbidopa, levodopa wasn't working. And that's the diagnosis. Okay. And then Kelly, how about Kevin? How did he know he was getting sick?
So we noticed symptoms in 2019. He was losing his balance a lot. He was falling, and his gait was changing. And so I found a neurologist for him to see, and she checked it out, did the testing and everything. And sure enough, she said, well, I think it's Parkinson's, we'll follow it. So she did. And a couple years later, though, because he wasn't responding to the medication, I also wanted to change doctors because he was not listening to his neurologist as far as exercising and doing the things he was supposed to be doing. So we changed over to another doctor at Kaiser, Dr. Lee, same one in San Leandro. And Dr. Lee followed Kevin. So it was 3 years later that Dr. Lee said, I don't think it's Parkinson's, I think it's MSA. And that took us for a loop because we had no idea what MSA was. And so in the past 2 years, though, he's been exhibiting a lot of the symptoms that come along with MSA.
Okay, thank you. So move on to you, Diane. So can you just briefly tell us what were some of Jeff's first symptoms? And
Well, what I now know, sorry, I'm getting over a cold. One of those stress indicators that we saw up there.
right.
So what I now know was likely the first symptom is in about 2016, 2017, my husband started getting startled very easily. If there would be a loud noise in the house, not even all that loud, like me unloading the dishwasher, or if someone would walk in a room suddenly, or a light would go on, he would have this huge startle reaction, and his heart rate would go up and he would jump. And honestly, my husband was sort of in denial that that was anything unusual. I was too loud or people were too fast or something. And really what he started paying attention to is in 2019, he started having pain and tingling in his left hand. And that was treated as tendonitis and he had surgery. 2020, he was an avid cyclist. And suddenly while he was out on his bike, he couldn't unclip his left leg to stop his bike at a stop sign. And all he could do was sort of let himself fall over. And it was that cycling incident that made him finally acknowledge that something was wrong. In the meantime, COVID had started and I was spending more time at home with him. And I started noticing cognitive and speech issues. And they likely had started before that, but because I wasn't spending all day with him every day until the shutdown, it really struck me there were a lot of cognitive problems going on as well. So we started going to a neurologist at Palo Alto Medical Foundation in 2020. After a lot of studies, that neurologist determined that he felt my husband, he couldn't identify a problem, that it was just he was aging early. He was 55 at the time. I wasn't satisfied with the answer, but it took some more incidents for my husband to be willing. Then we tried UCSF. And that's where he was diagnosed with corticobasal syndrome. And it was a long process. It was more a process of elimination because of prior health conditions. He had some indicators for multiple sclerosis as well. Huntington's disease was also in the mix. So it really took about 1.5 years of checking off everything it wasn't that wasn't the case till we ended up with CPS.
Thank you. And then David, how did you know Camilla was getting sick and that there was something wrong?
Well, I think like everyone here, it happened a little bit at a time and they all seemed isolated. But I think initially she was running a small company and she started noticing that she was having trouble with people responding to her and couldn't figure that out. Began having lapses in conversation where she would be talking and then just stall for a while, searching for words. Shortly thereafter, we live in a 2-story house, began to have trouble with balance and was really worried that she was going to fall. And I was thinking, again, you're just getting older, we can deal with this. She began falling asleep at random times at dinner, and we had an active social life and business, and that wasn't good for her career. So she got very concerned. I think the incident that got us very serious about figuring it out was she had a total temporary amnesia episode where she didn't know where she was, why we were there. We were in New York visiting our son. She didn't remember that her son lived in New York. And at that point, we said, we got to talk to a neurologist. We got an appointment at Stanford and a period of about a year and a half of testing, scans, talking to specialists. They came up with a diagnosis of corticobasal.
So back to you, Doug. Can you briefly tell us, did Diane get any physical therapy, occupational therapy, and if it helped or not?
She did. She had it for several years, and she was bound and determined, like a lot of people are, to keep going to, at the highest rate possible for as long as possible. So she went through that for about 2 years, and then that all stopped just about 1.5 years ago. It just they came in and you can't get it, ongoing. So what they do is they train you to do basically their function, and then they leave, and then you start over again 6 weeks later with the same process. And as of 1.5 years ago, they said that there's really nothing more they could do for her.
All right. And on to you, Ellen. How did your mom's living situation change with her illness?
Well, her living situation had drastically changed. She's been working as a clinical psychologist, living as a widow for 2 years, having downsized from a big house to a condo. I should mention when she was diagnosed, or before she was diagnosed, one of the symptoms that something was wrong that I forgot to mention, she got it in a puppy. And I came to visit her, and the puppy was peeing all over the place, and she was oblivious. It was so unlike my mother to not notice things like that. And she also had a car accident. She drove up the wrong side of the street. Not a car accident, she was ticketed. Risky things. But her living situation changed because she came to live with us, and we created an ADU in our garage. We converted it for her. And we moved her into the house after a time because she would get up to answer her cell phone across the room, and she had a bad fall, hit her face on the corner of a table, lost a tooth, and she'd been a dental hygienist for her first job, so she knew, and she went back to bed. And then she came into the house at noon, swollen, and I'm like, what's going on? I mean, she couldn't save the tooth, but she was really just more and more bewildered. And because she'd been a clinical psychologist, she was sensitive to the fact that she was losing her ability to process information and ask questions. She couldn't make herself understood. So anyway, her living situation was that she ended up coming into the house, and we had systems in place to manage her.
And then on to you, Ellen. What help, or Joan, I'm sorry. What help did you get at home for Will?
Well, I heard the last speaker talk about getting help, and people would say to me, "You need to get help." And I'd say, "Help with what?" Cooking. No, I can cook. I cook simply. I like what I make. Laundry. Laundry's not a big deal. I go out into the garage, I put the laundry in, I come in, I do whatever I was doing. But I used to be able to leave Will, and I called him, and he would answer the phone, and he was still mobile with a walker at that point. And I called, and he didn't answer. So did he fall? Is he hurt? Is he alive? What happened? And that's when I said, you know what? I need somebody here with him. I don't care what they do, if they sit and watch TV or sit and take a nap, as long as somebody is here with him. So I went through about 4 caregivers, one for the whole time, he's my favorite, 2 left for different reasons, nothing to do with us. And then the last one, we split the 2. And the caring, of course, got more and more and more. It started out more companion and just being there for him, and it ended up being pretty serious care.
How did you find them?
I went through 2 different small family-run agencies, and I had heard about them, one through different people, one spoke at a group that I'm in, and yeah.
Great. And then Callie, where are you getting support, and what support groups are you involved with?
A lot of my support is actually my family who is here, and my husband does a lot. He's more patient than me. My daughter does a lot, and she's in the medical field, so my brother tends to listen to her more, even though I would say the same thing, but he listens to her, which is fine. We accomplish the same goal. And then also, like Joan, I have outside support to help. And we've had a family, I call him a family caregiver because he's taken care of my father-in-law and also now taking care of my sister-in-law and my brother. So we share him during the week, but it's difficult to find good caregivers. And some of the agencies that I've called or contacted, they can send people, but they're limited to just the basics. They cannot take blood pressure readings, which my brother requires. We require that every day, and they don't administer medication. So for us, it was going through just a private caregiver, which was much more beneficial for us than a caregiver through an agency. So that was, yeah.
So Diane, moving on to this it's kind of a difficult subject, but I think it's important. Can you tell us your experience with end-of-life choices, death with dignity, and the other options you looked at?
Sorry, I
If you
know.
can.
Yes, I will.
Okay.
I think this is important for people. My husband was always a very upbeat, optimistic person. And when he got his diagnosis, it was actually cortical basal syndrome and Alzheimer's, both. By then, in January of 2024, he was fairly advanced in both conditions, but he was very optimistic and wanted to fight it as hard as he could. And he maintained his optimistic attitude until he was no longer able to walk. And beginning last December, he started talking about feeling it was at the end of his life. And I want to bring this up to people because it's a conversation he and I had never had up until that point. His years of challenges with his health, we had done an advanced directive, but we had never really talked about how do you envision your life at the end. And he began to ask for end of life beginning in April. And I was not very educated about California's End of Life Act, and we hadn't really worked with our palliative care doctor to talk through these options because I didn't expect this. He was a person who loves life. He is a person who loves life, but not being able to walk was something that he just could not envision continuing on after that. And I wanted to bring it up just to let other people know to have those conversations while you can before you're faced with a crisis. And for us, it was a crisis. And we're in hospice. And we went and we did request end-of-life care for him, and he was denied due to the advanced state of his Alzheimer's disease. And now we're in a situation of managing for his comfort, understanding that his life is not what he wanted. And it's difficult for me to talk about this, but I feel that if I had been aware and thought about these options earlier on, it might have been a little bit easier to deal with. Where he is now, though there is a good ending to this story, at least at this point, is through hospice, we have worked very hard with his mental health and how he views his daytime. And I would say he's getting back to being the more cheerful, optimistic person he was. We had to make trade-offs. We had to go off some medication that was helping him symptomatically. But I think from his perspective, he is glad we went through the process, and he's glad that things have ended up the way they are. But I know that for many, and I know others who have had the same diagnosis, that who were prepared, that have found a lot of relief in the ability to take advantage of the End of Life Act. So just a heads up for people to think about.
Thank you for that. So, David, you said that Camilla had done a lot of things to stay sharp and active. What did she do?
Camilla, if a doctor recommends something, she will do it. She's
Well, you're lucky with that.
very active in terms of art. She has a trainer that works with her 3 times a week to do physical stretching and balance exercises. She swims, has changed her diet, tries to eat right. The one thing she really struggles with is still sleep. But she's getting more, and she's working harder at that. She reads endlessly. She's a great self-advocate. She has assembled a fabulous team of people to work with her, and that kind of drives her. But I would say the core thing, she was not an artist, but she decided she liked drawing flowers, and now she's become, I think, a very good artist. And it's hard for her because the first time she does a piece, it often looks bad, but she will drive herself and keep doing it and redoing it until it's good. So basically, I would say if your spouse or the person you're caring for can't advocate, then it's the caregiver's responsibility to advocate, get care, get specialists, try and encourage that person to listen to the specialist. She was having trouble walking and had moved to a walker and periodically would ride one of the little motorized carts. But she talked to a movement specialist and they said, we can do something with braces. And she got leg braces and now she can walk again.
Wow, that's awesome. So Doug, can you tell us a little bit about Diane's clinical trial experience? Was it worthwhile?
Yeah, when we got involved with UC San Francisco, we got involved with a basically observational trial, which I think they've discontinued, which is really unfortunate because one of the questions everybody seems to ask in the support groups is, what's the progression going to look like? And it would be nice to have a study that actually tracks some of that. But then she was also involved she was patient number 1 in a clinical trial, which unfortunately was unsuccessful, but at least, and there's more of these trials that are actually coming out, which is hopefully a good thing for all these neurological diseases.
Thank you. And Ellen, how did caring for your mother affect the relationships with your family at home?
Oh. Well, we had an interesting challenge because my husband's widowed elderly mother was in Athens, Greece. So he was on the phone with her every day for an hour. And we had our son come home from college abruptly. So I was in that sandwich generation situation. And I got some resentment from both of them, I think, about the attention that my mom demanded of my care. I ended up eventually having to quit my job. Downshift, really. I looked for other work that was kind of, I could manage my schedule better. It was both good and bad, and that the bad part was clearly frustrating. I didn't feel like I had enough support and compassion from them. The good from that was that I had to seek it elsewhere, and I found BSN actually through a physical therapist that had come to the house who recommended it, because otherwise everybody said, go to the Alzheimer's support group. And I'd gone and it was not a fit. They didn't understand or relate, and it wasn't a fit. Robin Riddle and this whole effort, I mean, I'm eternally grateful. It got me through. But it also ultimately showed me and the 2 boys, my husband and my son, they learned to have more compassion and recognize the difficulty. And toward the end of my mom's life, they were actually quite aware of, strangely, the gift of having had her in the house. So it's kind of it's a test of your relationship, and it can be a deepening of the relationship. And I'm sure for some, it can fracture your relationship depending on their needs. For us, it ultimately worked out, but it was definitely challenging for a while.
Okay, Joan, did you use hospice or palliative care? What was your experience with that?
Oh, yes. We used palliative care, although honestly, until the end of palliative care, I couldn't tell you what they actually did for us, unfortunately. At the end, I needed some help working the system. We had home health care, and I had some real issues. I had an OT, a PT, and a home health nurse. The OT was really good with Will, but he was a complete jerk. He was inappropriate. He would say really bizarre racist things, not about me, but about others. It was really strange. I won't even go there. And he was totally wrong with what he said. So I asked palliative care to help me get a different, I wanted to go with Kaiser Home Healthcare instead of the agency they were using. And we were just about to make the change, and somebody suggested I call and ask for a supervisor at the home health agency, because I didn't really want to change everybody. And we did, and it worked. But they were helping me to make that change from the different home health agencies. Hospice, I called somebody in and they came right away and they evaluated him and they said, yes, he definitely qualifies. But I decided to wait because I wanted to try OT and PT again. And I don't think of hospice as giving up, but I do know that you can't use OT and PT when you have hospice. So I wanted to give it one more try because he had been hospitalized. He couldn't stand after that. And I thought we just need to try OT and PT. And that was that bad experience with the bad OT. So once that was done, I said, okay, we're going to call in hospice. And that was February. And I couldn't have done it without them. Them and my comfort cat, she helped. But seriously, hospice was wonderful. He had a lot of bed sores because he was bedbound by then. And so we were able to get 7-day-a-week nurse care. And it was only about an hour, sometimes less, sometimes more. But someone was there every single day. And then the last 11 days of his life, we had CNC, learn all the jargon. It's complete CHC, complete home care, where we had 24/7 nurses. And they were LVNs. And then it's only good for 3 days. And then every day they have to bring in an RN and they have to reevaluate it. That's a Medicare thing. But except for one not great nurse experience, I won't even go into that, but they were all wonderful. And when I mentioned the experience with the negative one, they said, don't worry, she won't be back. So they really supported me. They supported him. They supported everything. And I highly recommend hospice.
Me too. I'm a big hospice advocate. So anyway, Callie, moving on to you. You told me Kevin's disease seems to be progressing more rapidly. How have you had to adapt and handle that? And then, and you talk about that piece of equipment, the U-step thing that you like so much.
Yeah, I'd say in the past 6 months, maybe he's declined quite a bit. More so, I think the decline is more than it has been in the past year or year and a half. So in 6 months, he's gotten more weak, I guess, to be able to walk on his own. He does a lot of freezing. He hasn't fallen too often, although he falls and fortunately when he falls, he doesn't really hurt himself. So I don't, that's a positive thing. But also his swallowing has been compromised. So now with medications, we have to use applesauce or pudding. He can't swallow just with water. He'll choke easily. Also, getting out of bed is more difficult for him. He used to be able, and sometimes he has good days where he's able to get up from the bed and get to his walker and then walk to the dining room to have his meal. But lately, he hasn't been able to do that very often. So we have this sit to stand equipment that normally a person who is able to sit and then pull themselves up would work well. This equipment would work well for them, but it takes 2 people now for him to get onto that equipment. But the positive thing about it is that we can, once he gets on there, we can wheel him to the dining area or wherever he needs to go. So that's been very helpful. And I think his cognitive abilities have declined. Of course, initially his executive functions were compromised in the beginning, but now part of his memory is going, and he's having much more difficult time managing some of his finances. So we can see a lot of it just progressively declining, which is part of the condition.
Okay, Diane, can you tell us a little bit what help you do have at home?
Yeah, I looked after my husband on my own for about a year and a half to 23 and until about a year ago in 24. I made the choice at that time to start bringing in caregivers. And I should say, actually, my husband made the choice because he wanted additional socialization and interaction. I'm a pretty quiet person and he's very chatty. So he was looking for companion care. But I have to say his condition declined pretty rapidly. And within 4 months, by last fall, I have 24/7 care. Part of that was because he started waking very often during the night and needing help during the night, and I just need my sleep, but also because of his movement problems, and he started developing more behavioral and mood issues. I really needed that expert care. So at this point, I have 24/7 care. I've chosen to only hire CNAs because of the type of care that's required. And I have one private and two through an agency. So I just sort of pieced things together as I found the right people. I found it really hard to find aides that were skilled with both the movement disabilities that he had, as well as the issues that were more behavioral and cognitive with Alzheimer's. And of lucky, knock wood, right now I do have a set of 3 people who help quite a bit.
So the caregiver that you did privately, how'd you find them?
That was a referral through a family friend. I mean, she was one of the first we found last year, and I asked my husband to choose his caregivers. And so I invited people from agencies to come. We had several referrals, and it was the woman that he chose. Very outgoing, cheerful person, quite chatty, exactly what he wanted, a lot of social interaction. But I was just lucky. She had been looking after a family friends, and her client had just passed away and she was free and came to meet us, and just
So
that's the way it works.
Did you guys ever consider getting any legal help with that? I mean, taxes, background checks, that sort of thing?
Actually, this woman's daughter set up a corporation. But it was and so she operates as an agency. But that was one of my concerns about going privately. And we had just finished our estate plan right before I hired the caregiver. So I was ready to work through an attorney, but then found I didn't need to do that.
So, has anybody hired anyone privately? I mean, and did you hire an attorney? I just, somebody's
I
wondering about that.
for reasons that aren't worth belaboring here, my mom didn't come with enough means. So we found through the church she'd been attending somebody who'd gotten a reputation for being a good caregiver. She was a CNA, certified nursing assistant. So she could do the blood pressure and blood sugar measuring and administer medication and things. And I did not seek any legal oversight into vetting her. I just got recommendations and really vetted that. And really, my mom met her and liked her. And in fact, my mom didn't think she needed her. She didn't want her. She was very determined that I don't need any help. I'm fine, even though she accepted that she'd had a diagnosis. And then I insisted, and my brother helped insist from afar, Mom, this is for Ellen. Just go out with her so Ellen has a break. And eventually, within 6 months, she fell and broke her arm and needed suddenly a lot of care at home when I was working. So this same gal who'd just been a companion and politically similar to my mom and could chat really well and all these things suddenly became the caregiver, and she was accepting. So it's a hard thing to navigate. Sometimes they don't want somebody to help them.
Candy, can I just add something? So our caregiver for my brother is a family friend, and I think word of mouth is so important. And especially if you're obviously hiring private, but if you're going through an agency as well, I think it's also important, word of mouth, because the quality and the level of care that each person gives, it just varies. So we've been fortunate. So Kevin has 3 caregivers now. And the first one was a family friend who've taken care of my aunt's friend, and then my father-in-law, and now my sister-in-law. And so that was really important that we knew him, and he works well with Kevin. And then I have a female one who came by word of mouth as well. And we didn't do any background checks either. I think I did speak with the person who used her, and she had nothing but positive, remarks about her. So it's so far working out well. I do think that they should have the person interview with the care receiver, because that's important. I think the chemistry makes a big difference too.
Yeah, thank you.
One comment on that, everybody, all the presentations say you need to make sure and take care of yourself. You need to be able to get out and do things and all this other kind of stuff, which obviously involves caregivers at some point of the treatment based on where the progression is. But everything costs money. So to come here today cost me $400. I mean, and so you start going, okay, now do I want to go out with dinner with friends? Now it's not in addition to the dinner, it's going to cost me. So you start thinking of things very differently than you would ordinarily.
For sure. So, David, I wanted to ask you about Camilla's participation in studies or in clinical trials, and was it beneficial?
She's in 2 clinical trials, one at UCSF and one at Stanford. I'd say it's been mixed. I think it's interesting. She feels like it's a good thing for her to do to kind of help add to the understanding of the disease, helps other people. She feels good about that. The whole concept of a study, though, versus having a doctor who's caring for you, they're different. In the study, you're obviously just a subject, so your data, and there's not always much warmth associated with that or much identification. So that's the downside of the study. So it's worthwhile, it contributes to the science. It's not always a pleasant experience. And again, I kept telling her, Camilla, you're not Camilla, you're data. So deal with it. So that's it. She had her last UCSF summary was difficult because the doctor there who made the final presentation laid some doubt about the diagnosis. And that really threw her off. Things disrupt her, but she's been living with one reality, and one doctor who had only spent probably an hour looking at the stuff said, I'm not sure the diagnosis is right. That was extremely unsettling for her. So those are some of the risks you run in studies.
Okay, so Doug, you talked about your bucket list. So what are some of the things that you thought were important to do after a diagnosis?
Well, as soon as she realized that she had a neurological disease and kind of what her condition was, she knew that I wanted to go to Italy. So we immediately went and packed, she arranged a trip to go to Italy. And I said, you can't do that. You're not in a physical condition to be able to do that. And she said, we're going to do it anyway. And we did. And so she did that. And she wanted to write a book for her grandniece who raises guide dog for the blind. And so she did that, got it published. It's on Amazon. She wanted a website. She did poetry, which a lot of it turned into being about PSP. And then she was an avid quilter. And so we got the website set up for her to be able to do that. She pushed herself really hard for the physical and occupational and speech therapy in that direction. So she did that. She finished the final quilt it was pretty simple for what her skill sets were, but she was able to finish that. So she kind of went right down her list of things that she wanted to get done. And she accomplished, and she did a video. if any of you are working with Sutter at all, their palliative care program, one of their options is they allow you to do a legacy video at no charge to you. It's all covered from a grant. And so she was able to actually do a legacy video as well on that. So, she did a great job.
Alan, you touched on this a little bit, but talk a little bit about the work struggle and caregiving.
It's, well, so I'm one of 4 kids, and I'm the one that lives far away from where my mom originally was living. So being in California and not having my siblings to share in any of the discovery and the grief and the worry and the how do you navigate all these decisions that need to be made while I was maintaining my work demands or meeting them or trying was really hard to balance. And at a certain point with her progression, because she lived for about 4 years from diagnosis to when she passed, which is during COVID. I ended up having to quit my job. I didn't have to, but the stress was so high, given her needs and the demands on me and the degree to which I felt I had to give more and more and more of my attention to her to understand not just all the care issues that I could resolve that were invisible to her, but the relational changes, because we'd been so close and she was talkative and she had been a clinical psychologist. So she would be inquisitive about my feelings, and she could still do that now and again. So we were talking more and more about death and dying and issues. It was a lot, and it was overwhelming. So I ended up having to step back, as I said. It was just, I didn't have the means, my mom didn't have the means to hire somebody every day. I did install Wyze cameras, spelled with a Y, WYZE, $30 a camera, mount them wherever, put a little card in so you could play them back. And I would monitor her from work so I could see during the day where she was and if she'd gone outside and wasn't coming back or something. So, I was trying to manage it, but it became too much for me. So it's hard. It's just, if you can't pay for somebody to be supportive, and the cameras will only work so much, you end up, I think, having a really difficult choice to make at some point. Yeah.
Joan, did you consider a brain donation, and how did that discussion go when you first started talking about it with Will?
Well, I mentioned it, and he wasn't very talkative at that point. He didn't say anything. And honestly, I thought it was kind of creepy. So I was glad. I said, okay, that's it. We're done. We're not doing that. And then a few months later, when he was barely talking, but in bedridden, I mentioned it, not asking him, but just mentioning it. And I don't even remember what I said, but he said something like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And I took that as a yes. And at that point, he was getting really agitated over really weird things. Like I could see he was agitated, and I'd say, what's the matter? And it was something ridiculous that we had talked about the day before that didn't mean anything. So I knew I wasn't going to mention it again, but I took his "that's interesting" as a yes. And so we're in the process now.
Callie, when you say you have 3 caregivers, how do you manage all that? Have you had to train each one individually, or do they train each other, or how does that go?
No, their schedules didn't overlap, so I had to train each one. The first one we got, the family, I call him the family caregiver because he's taking care of so many people in our family. He just knew what to do. He's not a CNA, but he's been caregiver for many people through an agency as well. And he knows all, that needs to be done. And he's been with Kevin for about 2 years now, a little over 2 years. So he knows the cadence. He knows what needs to be done. The other 2 new ones I did have to train, and they're not CNAs. The one I got from an agency, he really didn't have any experience at all. And when I found out that he couldn't do blood pressure reading, it was kind of a shock, and I had to get back to the agency and say, what's going on here? And they explained to me he couldn't do that. And he really didn't know what a blood pressure machine was. So that was challenging, but it's okay because Kevin just needed companionship at that time. So when that person is on schedule, I still have to be there, or at least I have to be back every 4 hours because I have to take his blood pressure and then give him his medication. But it does require some training because there's certain processes that they have to follow. And I think Kevin is a very routine type of person. And I don't want to say OCD because it's truly a condition, but sometimes he can get that way. And so if the person misses something, he gets very nervous about it. So I've also trained him to speak up to the caregivers if something is missing, because what his tendency was before was to complain to me afterward about the caregiver not, administering or not putting his pull-up on properly. And I said, you need to speak to the caregiver about that as well. So training is helpful because there is a type of routine that they expect. Yeah.
Diane, you mentioned being a little sick with a cold recently as a stress reaction. And so how do you handle your self-care? What are you doing for yourself?
I think the first decision I made that was a self-care decision was when I agreed to have caregivers in the house. I think that really gave me some free time. I've tried to stick to an exercise routine somewhat. And given that I do have caregivers, I try to give myself 2 hours off every afternoon. And most of the time I just go into a quiet room and I read. But it's something I have to continually keep track of. I do get sick easily, and I know it's a risk to my husband as well. So I just try to do all the things that we saw up there on the slides. And I have to say, having come to the conference last year that Brain Support Network put on, I went through that checklist from the social worker and I did almost every single thing. And to me, that's self-care too. So I encourage people who haven't done all those things to go ahead and try and do it.
So, and David, what's been the most challenging thing caregiving for you?
For me, it's probably been the realization, both Camilla and I were fairly independent, and when she got sick, and it just demanded that I change and become much more involved. But accepting the fact that my life was going to change completely, and that I wasn't sure how, but I knew a lot of the things that I really enjoyed, I thought of as essential to me, accepting that they're pretty well gone. I have this fantasy that at some point I can get back to that, but I think that's a fantasy. And I think I've adjusted well, and I learned new things. I've gotten closer to Camilla, so there are benefits, but it's hard to know that who I was is not who I'm going to be or who I am now.
Okay, so these next questions, I'm just going to kind of open it up and throw these out there, and people can speak as they'd like to. So there's been some respite questions from the audience. Has anybody gotten like a respite, respite for their loved ones, either through an agency or other than just your normal caregivers?
Oh,
Go ahead.
Camilla and I discussed it, and she actually pushed me to this, but we decided every other weekend I would take a day off, and we would either bring someone in or my daughter would come in. And that worked for 1 week. And it was great. But then she got sick 2 weeks later, and her condition, she went through kind of a dip. So that was 2 months ago. So we had a plan. It was great. I felt reinvigorated, and I'm working back to that, but because all of these diseases have cycles, it's hard to come up with a regular schedule.
One
Kelly,
thing,
go
yep.
ahead.
One thing I recommend, is at some point, if you are going to need respite care, to call your facilities, your home care, or not home care, but basically your care facilities in your community, to find out if they take respite patients, and then specifically to find out if they take respite patients with palsy, because a lot of them won't. So that if something happens to you, do you have a place where you and your patient can go, or that the patient can go, or whatever, in case there's an emergency in your life?
I can't remember where I found her, but there was a volunteer who offered respite. She would come and spend a few hours with my mom and read her poetry and press flowers in our microwave. And
Wasn't through hospice?
it might have been actually, because my mom went in hospice the very day that COVID shut everything down in the 9 counties of the Bay Area. And she must have started around then. Now that I think of it, I'll find out if it's of any value, but she was terrific. And because I didn't have to worry about the financial cost, I could go, for me, I'd go to the Bay and I'd walk. And I did also take, at somebody's encouragement, my brother, I think, funded it. The caregiver could stay for an extra day or two overnight. And my husband and I went to Costa Noa. And it was September and it was cold and it was perfect. Anyway, yeah, it's important to do. Absolutely.
Okay. And another question that is a pretty common one, but how did you all handle the driving question? I mean, was it like a struggle, taking away the keys with anybody?
My mom had just moved and she didn't have a car. And she said, I want a car. And I said, well, you have to get a license first. And you can't get a license because you've gotten this diagnosis and you drove a wrong way down the street the other time. Yeah. She was really frustrated. So we ended up getting Lyft rides for her, and those worked.
Okay.
For her independence.
Yeah, if you live in the close-in Bay Area, that really is great. That's a fabulous option, actually. Joan, what are you going to say?
Will decided he didn't want to drive anymore when he slightly hit a car in a parking lot. And I kept saying, no, that's just one thing. You're okay. You can drive, because he did all the driving when we were together. And I really didn't want to do all the driving. But he insisted. And I realized later how lucky I was.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
same
for
here.
sure.
My husband had a little fender bender and just scared him to death because he realized he had slow reactions, and he just told me, okay, I'm going to stop driving, which I know we seem, sort of at least 3 of us had an easier time. I know that's a very difficult discussion for a lot of people.
Yeah. David, this question came in for you. Being, the unsettled diagnosis for Camilla, how do you feel about the one doctor saying this, the one diagnosis may be wrong, and does it really matter in the end, do you think?
It probably doesn't matter, but it upset Camilla's understanding of her situation. And luckily, she was concerned enough that she went back to her primary team and asked them what they thought of this. And she provided a transcript of the final meeting and everything. And her doctors came back and said, he's a respected, great doctor. We should pay attention to this, but we believe he misunderstood some of the history and some of the background. And we still confirm that while nothing's 100% certain until the autopsy, they basically said the symptoms all support this. So we don't believe there's any need to change care. I think what she was worried about is that what she had been doing was being negated by this change. And that she might have to change her routines, and all of that was unsettling.
Okay, Joan, you want to say?
Well, I was just going to say, don't we know that often when there's brain donation that the diagnosis comes out different?
Right, yeah, very often, actually, yeah.
My mom, her brain was donated, and they did confirm PSP in her, and they also said there were signs of Alzheimer's, a little bit. So for those that are considering and questioning whether they would want to do it,
So, and here's another question from the audience. How do you manage anticipatory grief on a day-to-day basis? Does anybody want to speak to that? Okay.
I just cry.
And what else can you do?
Yeah, well, the journey's been long and I held it in for so long. See, now I'm in the practice of crying, so it just hits like this. I just, at some point, I just had a breakdown one day and I thought, you know what, trying to pretend I'm not feeling these things doesn't help.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's any other better way to deal with it than just feel it. But also the anticipatory grief. I did talk to my husband about, after he was diagnosed, so a year and a half ago, what is it you want to make sure you've accomplished? And he came up with a list of 4 things. And I thought, at least that makes me feel better in my anticipatory grief, because I know he has it too. And we've done 3 of the 4 things. One, which was to have a big party. A couple others that were with friends. And the only one we didn't do was to put in a heat pump, because I thought, all right, I don't want to deal with that one.
That's not that important.
Yeah.
Ellen?
I think I mentioned already, my mom had been a clinical psychologist, and I've said it 3 times now, but she was so worried that she was a burden to me that the September before she passed, so it was, a couple months before the end for her, and her speech was she struggled so much to articulate anything and say more than a simple phrase. She asked me what I would do after she died, and I said, oh, this is that conversation. And I was so glad it happened, because I said, well, I'll be very sad. And I think what I'll do, and on the spot, I said, I'm going to drive your ashes across to North Carolina and meet my siblings and have a ceremony like you wanted, to put them in the lake. And then I'm going to drive around the country and have some adventures and revisit people that I haven't seen. And she goes, that sounds like a very nice plan. And we talked again later about, because she was open to it, she was questioning, she goes, I know I'm dying. I don't understand what's wrong with me. Things like that. We would have conversation about it, and I would be able to exercise my grief with her real time, which was unusual and valuable. It helped me a lot. I felt very complete finally when she finally went. Yeah. It's a good thing to do. It's hard, but
I think, one of the things
With
too is, and a lot of you, I'm sure, have dealt with it, is, as the patient progresses, their personality and things may change. And so what you have to understand is, what they're yelling or screaming or doing something like that, it may have nothing to do with you. It just may be where they are in their process. So you can't really take anything personally. You just have to say, okay, and it's hard to do. And it's taken me years, but I mean, you just have to get to the point where you go, okay, I understand what's going on, and I just back off and don't get mad, don't react, just take it for what it is.
Well, and their worry and grief comes out in different ways too. Like you say, that's, sometimes it's anxiety or yelling or whatever they do. Yeah.
But normally you take, if they're yelling, you think you did something. Right. What could I have done differently? And it's not about that.
Can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
It's only occurring to me now, I was talking about it at lunch actually, that I think the grieving process, when they're still alive, there's a spiritual component that I hadn't really appreciated, that I evolved in some ways with myself. And that is just kind of the very simple looking in their eyes and holding their hands. And whether you say it or not, it helps. Somehow it helps. So it's been a very accepting process. I think that's the part that you grow through. I mean, in a spiritual way. It's a connection thing. I don't know. It's complicated.
I just wanted to echo what Doug was saying, because at some point they do not know what they're doing or what they're saying. In my brother's case, there are a lot of times where he would say things to me that were very hurtful, and it's almost to the point where he thinks I'm trying to have him die faster. And so it's very hurtful. And it's difficult to explain to him that I'm here to help him, not, hasten his death. But they do say things that, are really off the wall, and it's hard not to take it personally. But I have to remember not to do that. And my family does remind me, it's like, it's okay, mom, it's the disease, it's not him.
Sure.
And it's true, yeah.
So as far as self-care goes, has anybody like participated or used a therapist for talk therapy, gone for therapy yourselves? Okay.
Yes.
Was it helpful?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a therapist, and I also started on an antidepressant about a year ago. And I think the combination has been extremely helpful.
Yeah, I couldn't have gotten through it without both of those things, you know. Yeah. So one more question here, because we're getting ready to wrap up, I think. But prior to being on hospice, did anyone have any luck getting Medicare to pay for equipment such as wheelchairs? So anyone want to speak to that? Okay, Ellen?
Yeah, my mom had Medicare and she got a Hoyer lift, a wheelchair.
Oh, via
bed.
Medicare?
That's Medicare.
Yeah.
It's not
Oh.
hospice, it's Medicare.
Wow,
Oh.
okay, cool.
Well, hospice, maybe I'm mixing it up, but we were provided all this equipment.
Well, hospice gets paid by Medicare,
So maybe, so
but it's a Medicare. We got it through Medicare.
Being on hospice.
Yeah.
Yeah, Medicare still pays for that, whether you're on hospice or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's
Okay.
a copay usually,
There
but
wasn't ours.
it wasn't a very big copay. Like
Okay.
Will had a U-step walker that, I don't know, was like $500 or something. And we had two different ones because they told us every few years we should get a new one. The first time they charged $91, so that's not a big deal. And the second time it was 71. I don't know, something went down. But, so there was a copay, but it was not a big deal. Yeah, and Dr. Lee was always really good about, if I asked him for something, I said, I think we need whatever. He would say, fine, and he would order it.
I do think working with the specialist is very helpful because they can request DME equipment that's needed. And Kevin had a Hoyer lift as well, and Medicare paid for a lot of it. And the doctor just said to try it out. So we tried it out for a couple days. He wasn't at the point yet to use the Hoyer lift entirely, but if you work with the specialist, the doctor, they can authorize the equipment.
Okay, thanks for that. So, and does anybody want to add like any silver lining, anybody feel like what they've learned or any benefit that's come from caregiving?
I would say, I want to jump onto something Ellen said about relationships. I would have to say, having gone through this with my husband and being his caregiver, we're closer than we ever were before. Yeah. So I think there are a lot of benefits you can gain if you put yourself at risk emotionally. At least when I put myself at risk emotionally with him and had some of the conversations about his diagnosis and his disease and his death, and then talking it through, we became much, much closer. So I'll always remember that as a positive that came out of this.
the very first speaker used a phrase, stress hardiness. I thought, I developed that as a caregiver. Nothing phases me now. I can talk to a boss about something I don't like. I can confront other difficult. It's like, I've seen worse than this. This is all manageable. It's okay.
That perspective.
It's a resilience you build.
That's
Yeah.
interesting because I'm the opposite. I don't put up with anything anymore. I'm not dealing with any of that.
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, it's the same idea. I can
Yours
confront
is more
things.
positive.
Oh, maybe. Yeah. No. I felt like I was the lucky one that had time with it. That's for sure.
I think one of the silver linings for me is that belonging to BSN, belonging to support groups, you meet a lot of people and you learn. I'll speak for myself. I've learned so much. And so, and you make good friends as well. You meet good people who understand and can empathize. And I think that's helpful going through this journey, however long your journey is. But it's very important to be connected with a support group, whether it's through a Zoom call or, in person, but something so that you have people who can empathize with you. most times if I'm talking to someone who really doesn't understand the disease, they probably think I'm just complaining. But it's a different, we vent with each other. Joan and I both have, had care receivers that had MSA, and when we check in with each other, it's a different thing. I could vent with her, and she knows I'm not fully complaining. I just need to vent, and she understands that. So I would highly suggest support groups.
And one last thing that you made me think of, and
Yeah,
it's
'cause we do have
kind
to
of,
wrap up.
it's kind of what you said. I met people in this journey I would not have met otherwise, and I'm grateful for that.
Well, thank you all. We have to end this. I'd love to keep talking to everybody. You have been fabulous, every single one of you. I appreciate it so much. So big round of applause for our panel.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, appreciate it. We'll just wrap up here. You guys can take your seats as you like. Just try to put down the microphones quietly if they're still on. Okay, so we somehow got back on schedule thanks to Dr. Ang and Christina for going fast too. So I'm appreciative of that. So we just, on behalf of the two co-hosts, Stanford and Brain Support Network, we just wanted to thank you all for coming. On behalf of our sponsor, Cure PSP, we want to thank them as well. And I know that they're very appreciative of everybody coming here today. We had 5 great exhibitors outside today, outside here at Stanford, and we'll share their information online as well. We had Acadia Pharmaceutical, Care Indeed, Home Instead, Right at Home. Those are the 3 home care agencies, and Toby Dynavox, all helping us. And they all sponsored scholarships so that people who could not afford to pay the fee today could attend, which we're very appreciative of. And we also have a note taker today. Liz Wong is in the back, and she's been taking notes today, and she will, as soon as we can, when we start to publish the recordings and the slides, we'll also be publishing her notes. So that sometimes those are really handy to have if you don't have time to watch the video, just check out the summary of the recording. So, and a lot of people who registered also bought Pay It Forward tickets. So I want to thank everyone, because we were able to give many scholarship tickets away, which is a great thing. When people are caregiving, they oftentimes are not working and can't afford it. And so it's nice to be able to help people out like that. I would like to thank all the volunteers today. We had just a great set of volunteers helping us get through the day. And we had great staff. Denise Dagon and Kevin Boyd, who helped a lot today. Yes, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone. And I'd like to also thank my co-organizer, Dr. Jocelyn Zhao. It's our 3rd big event together. And just a very funny story, mostly because I want to rib her a little bit. She emailed me last night at 9:30 p.m. and said, "Oh, I have a caregiver who's in some amount of distress. Could you give her a call sometime?" And this indicates how important caregivers are to the world of Dr. Jocelyn Zhao. She thinks that caregivers, like we all do, need to have some special care and attention. So here's the survey. Those of you who are in the room have a print copy of this survey. We appreciate your taking 5 minutes of time, and people will collect the surveys. People will also be collecting your badges, because we like to recycle those. We're here in California, of course, and that's what we do here. Those of you who are online, you can take a photo, and people here in the room can use their cell phone photos and take a photo of the QR code if you'd prefer to be filling it out on your phones. But at the end of the webinar online, everybody who you'll all be seeing a survey will pop up on your screen, so you don't need to do anything. So we do appreciate your survey response, your feedback. It's very important to us. And let's see, what's next? Okay, so in about a week, I'm not going to make a perfect commitment there, but in about a week, we should have recordings available to people, all of the slides, all the speakers said they're fine to give up their slides. Some of the speakers had audio and video, and I've already received some of those. As I mentioned, we have an attendee taking notes. Everyone who registered will receive an email with all that information, as many of the resources as we can gather outside that are of help. We're going to share all of those resources with everybody in this very long email. We have 2 events coming up. I don't know if anybody noticed either on the tables outside or on the slideshow. We have 2 events in August. One is on orthostatic hypotension, which will be of great interest to those with MSA. And the other one is just focused on PSP and CBD. And both of those speakers are Stanford neurologists. So that will be upcoming too. We also have a Brain Support Network email list, and I've already received several responses from our symposium here today. You're welcome to get where regardless of where you live, you're welcome to get on our Brain Support Network, PSP, CBD, or MSA email list. We hardly send any email. You're not going to be sorry. We don't send very much email. We never solicit. I can't think of a single time we've ever solicited to a national audience. We only ask for charitable contributions when we've done something for people, and we've run a support group or have a support group for meeting with them, or we've helped with them with brain donation. So basically, we don't solicit. It's not going to be a lot of email for you. Similarly, for those in Northern California, Northern Central California, we offer support groups. You heard today about the importance. I think you heard from everybody today about the importance of support groups. So that's very important. We run disease-specific support groups. And we also have support groups for people, not only caregivers, but people with a diagnosis. So we put PSP and CBD caregivers and those with a diagnosis together because those 2 diseases are quite similar. And then we have a separate group for MSA. And we meet monthly. We alternate, the caregiver group alternates between in-person and virtual. And the groups for people with a diagnosis are every month, and they're always virtual. Stanford has Parkinson's caregiver only support groups for those who live in the San Francisco Bay Area. So we invite people who are dealing with any atypical Parkinsonism condition to join those support groups as well. We have a couple people here I see from my Parkinson's support group, and probably Denise has the same. So there are a fair number of people with PSP, MSA, and CBD in those Stanford Parkinson's support groups. So we invite you to join those. And I just went by that really quick. We also have a Stanford mailing list too, so you can email us about that. And again, all these links, don't worry about it. QR codes, don't worry about them. We'll send everybody out the information. Okay, I just want to make a few personal comments. So it's the eve of Father's Day, and I mentioned my dad, Larry Riddle, had PSP. This is one of my favorite photos of him. We're having pina coladas in Mexico, Acapulco. I took him once myself when he had PSP and once with my husband. It was tough work. I also took him once on safari in Africa with a wheelchair and a walker. That was tough work, but we did it, and those are great memories to look back on. So we did the best despite PSP. The next is my father-in-law, Hall Evans. And a few months prior to his passing, he was curiously diagnosed with PSP as well. And I thought, well, this is a little bit too much of a coincidence to have a dad and a father-in-law with PSP. He died, donated his brain, and he did not have PSP. He had Parkinson's disease. And so I don't know if I mentioned before, I think I did, that my dad, when he died, also diagnosed with PSP. So those are 2 great father figures. Next on the list is Rex Christensen. He is my stepfather, and he died just around Christmas of this last year. And I saw my mother dealing as a spouse caregiver, saw her just dealing with all the travails of he had a lot of movement problems, also died, donated his brain, and it was Parkinson's disease. So there's a lot of Parkinson's and atypical Parkinsonism running around in my life. And then the last is my good friend, Stephen Russell. He was here with us, a longtime friend for 20 years, worked with me at Stanford and at Brain Support Network. He was here last June. We had a conference, several people mentioned it. And I noticed strangely, he wasn't having his lunch, wasn't really enjoying his meal that day. And he was dead and gone a couple months later. He had esophageal cancer. I was his healthcare power of attorney. So I had 4 very intense caregiving experiences in my life, some shorter and some longer than the others. But I know that caregiving is not without its challenges, and that's what this day is all about. So I hope you all can go away with some good tools in your toolkit now. And I thank you so much for being here, because like Christina said, I know it takes a huge effort to be here, whether it's in person or online. So we'll see you next time.